water. So the principles of water are I should be able to do that. The principles of water are, first of all, how long does it take to get a towel wet? 3 seconds. How long does it take if you hang the towel up against the wall on a rack to get dry? A day. How about if you bunch it up and stick it in the corner? A week. How about if you put it on a clothesline? 2 clotheslines, so it goes up one side and across and down the other. Right? It can be a couple hours in the sun. Okay? Things get wet right away. They dry out in direct relationship to the amount of what? 2 factors, air and heat. So people used to put towels over radiators, and we get tremendous amount of heat. What is the drying rack that used to be in houses for towels? What did it look like? Does anybody remember? There was two kinds of drying racks. One was a frame that had pieces that went across it, and one had a hinge with a bunch of arms that came out. Now, how many arms would I use for a towel? To dry a towel? 2 arms. Up one side, across, and down the other side. I don't want to hang it on one because they're going to get the inside to the inside, and it's going to take it much, much longer to dry. I want maximum air circulation to get rid of water. Understanding how water works is the most crucial thing about maintaining a healthy house. The most crucial thing about maintaining a healthy house. The first thing is the biggest amount of water that threatens a house is what? Where does the largest quantity of water that could get a house wet come from? That's very good. Tom, could you demonstrate that again? He's studied with Hawaiian dancers to be able to learn this. Rain, okay? Precipitation. So it's going to rain on the house. There's nothing that's going to stop that. And that's not a problem as long as the house is able to shed that drain. And what are the devices to get that water away from the house that hits the roof? 2 different things. Downspout and the gutter, right? So what the gutter does is the gutter gathers the rain that comes down, and hopefully the gutter is sloped toward the downspout. And the water then comes down the downspout and comes here. Do we have a problem here? What's the problem? The ground is sloping. I know it's hard to see from back there, but the ground is sloping toward the basement. So what we're going to create is a lake. It's a very bad place for a lake because it's going to infiltrate here, and it's going to get moisture here, and it's going to get moisture here, and this little pile of stored material is going to get very wet. And what's going to happen when this gets wet? It's going to get moldy. And now we have a problem because whatever air does get into the house is now full of mold spores. So it's critical to move that away, and the way we do that, when a house reaches the ground, why is this dirt different than that dirt? What's the difference between the dirt next to the house and the dirt about 4 feet away from the house? It's backfilled. It's backfilled. This is disturbed dirt. To put a foundation in the earth, you had to dig a hole. And when you put the dirt back in, you just kind of push it back in. But the dirt over here is compact. So I don't want, even if I have it sloped away from the house, I do not want the water entering the ground next to the house. And what device can I use to get it away from the house? 2 things. Right, a tray. It's a block. It's a drainage block, and it looks like this. And it's usually like made out of like concrete. And so the water hits this, goes down this groove, and spills out onto the ground out here. Okay? So that's a drainage block. Or you could put an extension. Or you could put an extension on here. The problem with that is that if it's not hard, people will step on it and crush it. So you want the water to shed away from the house, number one. Secondly, there is no house that doesn't get wet. Joe Struberg, who understands this stuff fairly well, was invited into the Library of Congress because they had hired a bunch of consultants to take the moisture out of the Library of Congress. I don't mean the Library of Congress. Why don't we want the Library of Congress to be damp? They'll destroy all the books. The purpose of the Library of Congress is to save books. You don't want it damp. So we had all these people, these engineers came in to try to pump the moisture out of the building. And why did that create a problem? If the moisture is bad, then why is it a bad idea to pump the moisture out of the building? Exactly. It created negative pressure in the building. And Joe said he had two reports. The one report cost tens of thousands of dollars and was that thick. And the other report was this. The Library of Congress sucks. He gave them the big report, of course. The Library of Congress literally sucks. The Library of Congress is made out of porous marble. You put the building under negative pressure, it sucks the moisture in. So when the walls get wet, it pulls moisture into the Library of Congress. What was needed was not to pump the moisture out, but to put the Library of Congress under positive pressure. So it was pushing the water away rather than drawing it in. This is a fairly simple notion. So the walls will get wet. You just want to make sure that any water that gets in the walls is able to drain out. And even if it drains out, the building will get wet. And so you want it to dry. So you always want it to shed, you always want it to drain, and you always want it to dry. And you need to understand what's going on in the walls. So if it is very, very hot and moist inside and very cold and dry outside, which way is it going to move? Number 4, warm, wet moves to cold, dry. In the wintertime, it's warm and wet inside the house. It's going to move to cold and dry outside the house. What happens when warm, wet hits a surface that's cold? Condensation. Now, let's look at inside this wall. Here we have a wall, and it has this is the bottom plate, the piece of wood that runs along the bottom and on the floor. And then these are the studs. So it has a whole series of wood studs coming up from there. And the water comes into the wall, and someone, to protect children from lead paint, has covered the building with aluminum siding. And they've done it with, I don't know if anybody has seen the aluminum siding where they put that yellow insulation with a silver foil on it against there. Silver foil is a vapor barrier. Water doesn't go through silver foil. So now we have warm, moist air going into the wall cavity because vapor barrier will move everywhere. You're not going to keep it out of places. It's going to move everywhere to some extent. And now it's going to hit this outside surface that's cold, and it's not going to be able to get out. It can't dry out. So it's going to condense, and it's going to run down here, and it's going to sit here at the bottom of this stud. Why is that a particular problem? What's unique about the bottom of a stud? What is a piece of wood for? Think tree. What's the purpose of the... It's to suck water out of the ground. And how high can it suck water out of the ground? Hundreds of feet, right? As tall as the tree is, it can draw. And how's it doing that? What's it called? Capillary action. It is drawing water up. Now, when you cut the tree down and you stick a piece of that tree in a puddle, it has a memory. It knows what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to suck water up. So one of my favorite photographs is a picture of a woman who the caption says is very upset because her 4-year-old $1.5 million house has all of the baseboard in the house started to tilt in. And there's a picture of the contractor who cut a hole at the bottom of the wall and taken out the insulation and is squeezing it, and there's a puddle of water on the floor. So what's happened here? Why are the baseboards all beginning to slope in? Remember way back I talked about houses? Well, one of the things they do that we do, the last thing we do, we return to the earth. Her 3-year-old house was returning to the earth because the bottom of all of the studs were rotting out and they were all settling, and the baseboard was being pushed in because the house was going home. Prematurely, as it turns out. If you don't understand how moisture works, then there's a bunch of problems you can't solve. What is the major cause of lead paint failure? Exactly. It's not that water splashes on it. You can splash in a bathroom where water is splashing on the paint. It tends not to make it fail. Hits the paint, runs off. Where it is destructive is when it gets behind. Now, what is drywall made out of? What's the surface of drywall? Paper, okay? And now we begin to have all these things interacting with each other. So how is the paper attached to the drywall? As glues. So we have paper, we have glue, and then we have gypsum board and another piece of paper. And now we've put paint on paper. And now we made the paper wet. How long is that paint going to last on it? I don't care. It's the best paint in the world. The paint's going to come off. If we have wood that gets soaked, the paint's going to come off. The major cause of lead paint poisoning is moisture in the wall. There's other causes. You can smash the door against the wall. You can have friction surfaces. Somebody can be dumb enough to take the doors down into the basement and sand them so they get sucked through the house. There's other reasons, but the major cause of lead paint poisoning is excessive moisture in the wall cavities. And so here we go and put aluminum on the outside of the building to prevent lead paint from coming off the outside of the building, and the kids' blood lead level goes up. Why? I've just covered the lead paint on the outside. How come the kids' lead level's going up? What? No. Lead paint on the outside of the house, lead paint on the inside of the house. I cover the lead paint on the outside of the house with a vapor barrier, something that doesn't let the moisture out. Why am I poisoning the child? Huh? Right, because it makes the paint on the inside come off. The paint on the inside was just fine till I did that. The moisture that entered the wall left the wall. I had wood siding. The house breathed. The house was designed to breathe. When people say, I don't believe in this lead paint stuff. I grew up in a house with lead paint and I was never poisoned. That's because of two things. First of all, the house was allowed to breathe because I didn't have all kinds of elaborate air conditioning systems in, because I didn't have so much forced air in, because I didn't put the house under negative and positive pressure, because I had natural ventilation, because the house was allowed to dry out. If the house isn't allowed to dry out, you're going to have condensation in the wall cavity. If you have moisture in the wall cavity, the paper is going to get wet. If the paper is going to get wet, the paint's going to come off. If there's lead in the paint, it's going to poison children. And what other problems am I going to cause when I have moisture and glue in a sheet? What's another cause of asthma? Mold. I'm going to grow mold. Think of drywall as a giant petri dish. It's food. It's paper. It's cellulose. It's wonderful for growing mold. I just came back from New Orleans, and you want to talk about abstract art. The drywall down there is just, if it wasn't deadly and if it wasn't destroying people's lives, it would be magnificent. The patterns of mold, the shapes, the textures, the colors are beyond belief. But when you go into the older houses, you don't see that. Why is that? Because they're plaster walls. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no mold on plaster, but it means that mold loves drywall, hates plaster. And what's another creature that we just as soon not live with that loves drywall? Wet, cellulose, glue, cockroaches. So now let's put paneling up over that. And now we have a space with a lot of holes that are about 3/8 of an inch thick. Cockroaches have an idea of paradise. They want several things. They want other cockroaches. They want about 3/8 of an inch thick space. And they want water and they want food. You've now created walls of cockroach paradise. You got moisture, no circulation, and you've given them food, and you've given them media that holds that moisture at a fairly constant rate, which is wonderful for growing mold and making your cockroach population extraordinarily healthy. And so let's put something into the air. Let's get a bug bomb and set a bug bomb off in the kitchen. And so it covers all of the surfaces, and leave the house and then come back later. Are we okay here? If there's an atomic bomb attack, what's going to survive, us or roaches? Roaches. Now, you're putting a poison into the air that is so intense that one of the baddest creatures in the world is going to die. What do you think that's going to do for you? You've just admitted that you're more susceptible to death than a cockroach, and now you're putting a poison. You are literally covering the surfaces of the room that you eat in with a poison that is so fierce that it's going to kill a cockroach. Actually, it just kills a few of them. They get really, really angry. They run off. They get stronger than ever, and they're back there. So I run a exterminating company, and my contract with you says that I'm going to come back every 5 months. And how long is the treatment going to last? 4 months. Why would I get rid of cockroaches when my intention is to keep coming back? I'm sure not going to do something to get rid of the cockroaches. My living depends on the cockroaches. So I'm not going to get rid of the causes of the cockroach. I'm going to simply spray a bunch of poison around. There is something much worse than cockroaches, and that's exterminators. Cockroaches don't spray deadly poison on the house. They do cause asthma, they're nasty, they're unsanitary, but they do not poison all the surfaces of the house. Exterminators do that. There are ways to get rid of cockroaches. Boric acid is the main one. It's not a poison, it's a desiccant. It dries them out and they die. And you put it behind stuff and you spray it around, and it gets rid of the roaches as long as you don't leave garbage all over, and the other people in the building do the same. And so we want to make sure that we don't create a problem when we're trying to solve a problem, because all of these things are inextricably related to each other. Okay? So looking at moisture, looking at the moisture in the house, we want to get rid of the moisture, and the main places, and we've already talked about this, is the steam in the bathroom. We want that out of here. The steam when we cook, we want that out of here. We want to make sure, and when we walk into the house, we want to look here and make sure that the caulking's good. How would you know that the caulking's really bad in the tub? What would you look for first? Where would you look first if you thought that there was really bad caulking in the tub to see if it was leaking? Where? The ceiling below. You'd stand down here and you'd look up, and if there's water stains there, then you know that there's something wrong with the tub. If there's water stains here, what's probably the problem? What about the toilet? What's the thing that leaks in the toilet? Couple of things. The wax ring. The wax ring right here. If you go into a bathroom and you're able to move the toilet up and down, the bolts that hold the toilet to the drain pipe with a wax ring, there's something wrong. It's leaking there. Or it could be leaking out of the little pipe that comes from the water tank. But you're pretty sure it's the toilet. Now, water does travel, so you want to look at the way it travels. And so if you looked at this house, what's the most likely place that the roof is leaking? If there was a place in this house where the roof leaked, what do you think the most likely spot on this particular house would be? The vent pipe, the chimney, those are two of the most likely places. I think there's a place that's even more likely. The house moves. The whole house moves. This part of the house moves differently than this part of the house. And that spot right there, and to some extent, this spot, but the porch tends to be attached to the house. That spot's one of the places that leaks. That spot leaks. That spot leaks. Wherever you have dissimilar material together, it leaks. Correct flashing does not attach this roof to this wall because it moves. And one of the things to really understand is that water can be a vapor. We've talked about that. It can be a liquid. We've talked about that. What's the third form water can take? Ice, a solid. Now, if water gets in a crack, what stops it from expanding when it freezes? It's the same question about where do you smoke in a house? Nothing. The reason the Appalachian Mountains don't look like the Rocky Mountains is because water got into cracks and expanded. Ice takes apart mountains. It splits rocks. That's one of the ways they used to split rocks. They'd put water down into holes, let it freeze, and it would pop the rock open. If any moisture gets in a place where one roof separates from another and it freezes, it's going to open it up. And now you don't have flashing. You have what's called a what? A funnel. It's going to collect moisture and funnel it down into the house. So correct flashing isn't attaching one surface that's going to move to another surface because it'll rip. Correct flashing looks like that. And these two things aren't attached. This piece of flashing is attached to the lower roof. This piece of flashing is attached to the wall. And when the two surfaces move differently, it doesn't make any difference because the water can't get in there. And they're allowed to move and still maintain a seal. Very few roofers do that. You can't, only the Army Corps of Engineers thinks it can control the Mississippi River, which of course creates disasters. What you want to do is you want to figure out what things are going to do, and you want to let them do that. So moisture becomes a critical factor in this. And when you have stuff stored down here, it's vital, and it's when we did the Healthy House program in Baltimore, the first thing we did before we went and did work in the house is we set up a little ritual. Tom had mentioned this before. There is a tendency for very low-income people to not throw stuff away because you've got a fear you're not going to be able to get it again. If you've got lots of money, you throw it away because you can go buy 5 more tomorrow. But you get nervous about throwing stuff away. So we all go into houses sometimes, and the houses are packed full of things. And do they know what's in those bags that have been down there for 14 years? No, but someday, and I'm sure all of us have this to some extent, we're going to look in there because it's probably valuable, and we want to go through it. That's what we say. We want to go through it before we throw it out, right? And then it gets nastier and nastier, and our desire to go through it gets less and less. And so we create a ritual where we set up a rack. And basically what it is it sits in the house, in the basement, and it's a rack with boards like this. And then you got legs underneath it. Why do I have these spaces here? And then we put a box up here. And then we got another series of shelves. What's this designed to do? Let air. We never build the shelves tight to the wall. We never put a box next to the wall. We never put a box on the ground because not only does wood wick water up, but concrete wicks water up, and brick wicks water up. Anything that's porous wicks water up. So the last thing in the world I want to do is create a pile down here that's going to collect moisture. I'm going to build a shelf, and I'm going to put the boxes, if I must store stuff in the basement, so that air circulates around the box, so that the air is able to wick the moisture away, so I don't wind up with mold and rats and rice and roaches. What's another thing in the basement where I'm really concerned with moisture? The dryer. And what do I want to do with the dryer? I want to do the same thing with the dryer that I'm doing with the shower, that I'm doing with the stove. I want to make sure it gets vented out. I want to make sure it's not good enough to put a filter in there. The filter takes out the lint, but it doesn't take the moisture. And the last place in the world I want to make wet is the place with the least air circulation, is the basement. I want that bone dry. So I want to make sure that a bunch of things are working, and I'll go through that list. And so the final thing is